Welcome, everybody. I've got a couple people here in the classroom. Thankfully, I feel unloved. All of you Zoom people, it's too cold to come out, I guess. So, but welcome. So I would say unmute yourselves. You're here. This is a Q&A, so I don't have an agenda. This is your agenda to kind of answer questions that you have. So either raise your hand, unmute yourself and speak, or those of you in the classroom can just ask questions. So we'll get started.
Yay.
I know. Happy New Year. Yeah. So, yeah. So the question was about the buyer's agency agreement, if they feel it's going to be offered down the road or if it's going to be required. And I can honestly say that I'm leaving Sunday to go to the Ohio Realtors convention. It'll be Monday, Tuesday. So I don't have any other updates other than to say that basically I know that there is a proposal in the House to make it mandatory that all real estate agents have to use it. What they're trying to decide is, when do you have to use it? Is it the very first time you meet with a consumer? Is it the second time you meet with a consumer? Is it just before you get the purchase agreement signed? In my opinion, I would say if you're just getting it signed as a check mark right before you get, as you're writing the offer, it really doesn't do you any good. Like, it defeated the entire purpose, because the point of the buyer's agency agreement is for the consumer to understand what they're paying up front. Like, what do they owe you? Believe it or not, I actually just had one of our agents, I don't see them on the Zoom here, but we had one of our agents just text me today, an agent, thank God, not from our company, but she just posted that her services are free as a buyer's agent, and you're not charged. And it's like, that is not true. And by the way, that's why we're in this lawsuit in the first place. So please don't ever say your services are free, because they're not. You are getting a commission, whether it's being paid by the buyer or not. It's still being paid to you by the other company. So the buyer agency agreement is twofold. It really protects you as the agent for the most part. I mean, it does say the consumer can email you, or you can email the consumer, and the contract is null and void. So it doesn't have teeth, but it does have the teeth to say that the buyer owes you a duty of loyalty. So at least they're going to have a conversation. Hopefully you would know right up front if they don't like you anymore, or they don't want to do business with you, because you're going to get an email that says, I don't like you and I don't want to do business with you anymore. It's essentially what it's saying. Right. Yeah. So essentially that's what it would be saying. So you're going to be upset because you're going to have worked your rear end off possibly for this buyer. And it doesn't give us any teeth necessarily with another brokerage, because it could help with procuring cause. It may not. It just depends on the situation. But it outlines your duties, and it outlines the fact that the consumer is going to be loyal to you, and they're going to tell you if they don't want to be loyal to you. The other thing is, it's going to tell them up front whether or not they owe you a commission. So they know that if they pull into a house that you show them and it says that there's $0 in commission, they know that they owe you that X amount, whatever that X is. And they also are going to be aware that there's a $295 transaction fee or additional commission fee here at our brokerage, or whatever it is that you charge. So I'm disappointed in Dotloop. They have not updated our purchase agreement yet. That's why you still don't have the $295. And here we are 17 days into January. So it's taking them a little bit. The listing agreement was done. That was done quickly, but we don't have that yet. So the buyer's agency agreement, I will say that most likely by the end of the first quarter, I would not be surprised if it is mandated, or there is shortly after that, the ruling comes out that it's mandated. Because the last thing I heard with the lawsuits are that NAR has hired additional outside counsel because they found an attorney or attorneys, a group of attorneys, that feel that there were mistakes made during the trial that should make it basically overturned. Like, there's no verdict yet, but that would render it useless. I don't know if that's going to happen before March 18th, but I believe that they're saying the judge has until just after the 18th. We should be hearing in March if he feels that we have done something wrong and that we're no longer able to pay a buyer's broker commission, or how that's going to work out. So right now it's business as usual for the most part, and we'll know more after March. And understand too, it's the government. I mean, it is a class action lawsuit and the government is involved, you know, the judge and everything. So it's like, who knows when this will actually be fully adjudicated and answers will happen. But Ohio realtors are lobbying to have it changed immediately to help protect agents. So, yeah.
To make it public, I don't know if this is in the works or you talk about this, but the commission then being made available to the general public could actually be useful, right? So if I have a conversation with a buyer and I say, you know, my commission is fill in the blank, it's a percentage or whatever, like my minimum amount is this. And if the house that we're going to look at doesn't offer that, then that would be something that you would need to cover. And so then as they're looking for houses, they can see whether or not they can evaluate, like, oh, on this house, I would actually have to call out some commission.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just brainstorming, but do you know what I'm saying? Because otherwise, they don't have a clue.
Yeah. So for those of you on Zoom, so Lynette is saying that basically she's hoping that the division or the consumer is alerted in some fashion that they might have the opportunity to say, okay, I understand what's going to happen when I go to a house that doesn't pay a commission, and maybe I don't want to see that house because it's going to trigger that I have to make a payment, right? Is that what you're saying? So, and that could happen.
Needs to get more transparent. And if we're going to do a buyer agency agreement where I'm going to essentially look out for my own commission, then help me protect my commission or explain my commission by why not then let the consumers know what is or isn't, if you want transparency and stuff. I'm just that may be a helpful tool.
And it could be. So, you know, just the one thing I will say is the buyer's agency agreement gives you the support that you need as far as with the consumer until they decide they want to go rogue, right? Because ultimately, unless we as brokerages decide that we are going to start suing a consumer for going to another agent or another brokerage and buying a house with that agent or brokerage, even though they signed a buyer agency agreement with us, we don't really have any teeth. I mean, unfortunately, the buyer agency agreement is not really worth the paper it's printed on unless it's willing to be enforced. And that's the same thing with our purchase agreements. When a buyer and a seller, a deal falls apart, what happens? The buyer and seller either have to sue each other or we let the deal go. I mean, we don't have the teeth for that. So it helps for the most part with the consumer to understand that they owe you a duty of loyalty, and hopefully they'll tell you up front. But the biggest thing that the court and people are saying is it's the transparency of the fee. That's what it comes down to, is what do I owe you? So that's why there for a while we had in our consumer guide the 225 transaction or additional commission. Keep wanting to call it a transaction fee, and really none of us should be calling it that. I mean, this is 20 some years in the business of calling it either an admin fee or whatever. It's an additional commission fee. The reason I say that is because there was a brokerage that got sued in the class action lawsuit, and they had to return some money to consumers during the class action, simply because they were calling it an admin fee, and then they were sued, and then they had to prove, well, what service was I paying for as the consumer for this X fee? And that's why I say, to teams, any team that's charging more than $295 now, you really need to be aware of having a sheet of paper, something either online or a document somewhere that says, if the consumer asks, why am I paying your team $499 when I can work with another Keller Williams agent for $295? Why am I paying that difference? You've got to be able to defend that value. That's not for us to try and defend. The $295, I mean, we are a capped brokerage, right? So, I mean, we once you pay your cap, that's it. We don't make any more money off of that. That $295 transaction fee is the difference between us being able to keep the lights on, pay the rent, and do all that stuff, and still provide profit share. I mean, we're an open book company. You can see our finances. So it's not like we're just pocketing hundreds of thousands of dollars and saying, oh, that's just for us to keep. I mean, that is truly to keep us profitable and to keep profit share up. So, and also to cover some of the cost, the things that we're covering are dot loop. That is not something Keller Williams actually with our $45 fee per month covers to have true forms, or I'm sorry, not true forms, DocuSign. And yet we have just not got there yet to where we want to use DocuSign. It's a little bit more cumbersome to get the forms uploaded and changes made and things like that. as I say, it's taken longer than 17 days to get back from dot loop, but nonetheless, it has taken a while. And so we do have people that are coming over from different brokerages that have started to use that. But we're not fully there yet. So basically, again, the gist of it is to say we can justify the costs that are associated with doing business as Keller Williams brokerage. You, if you're charging more than the 295, need to be able to justify that. And again, it should be an additional commission. It should not be called an admin fee. Even if you're paying your admin from it, you can justify that cost to say, we are charging additional because we are providing you with a transaction coordinator and us with a transaction coordinator who is calling you and following up on things and taking care of the transaction, whereas we're out on the next transaction, working. So, yes, Bob.
You say that Keller Williams can justify the 295. Is there a sheet or a form that we have that we can read off to our buyers, say, look, this is how we justify it?
Yeah, and that's a great point. We don't have a fee structure to say what we're charging the 295 for. We can rattle them off, but you're right. We probably should. That's a great point. We should probably have something just asking you too what the difference is. We should probably justify the reason for that additional commission. Yeah,
Please.
yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, good. Anybody online here have anything? Questions, comments, thoughts? And what's going on in the next room here? Linda, you're on mute, but you don't have anything to say, which is very odd. I'm going to call you out because you're on here. Nothing?
Okay, Rich, I got something.
Good.
Can a realtor have more than one ABA with title companies?
Yeah, so can they? Yes. Should they legally? No. It's been my understanding, and I don't have all the facts on this, but it is my understanding that there is a local real estate agent that we all know that has an office on Munson that was sued.
This is why
Was sued because that agent decided to have two ABAs, and I guess that's against RESPA. That's a RESPA violation. One of their own team members, if I understand correctly, actually got that started against them, and it did not turn out in their favor. I don't know that to be 100% accurate. That's the story that was told to me, but I do know you're not supposed to have two ABAs. It is a RESPA violation. And the other thing is, I will say to that is, I know of agents within our own brokerage that have two ABAs, and I think that there are some companies that are aware of it and they've had conversations. And if the agents are taking the risk, it's a real risk between them and their title companies that know about it.
Okay. I had a closing recently with a company that I have a relationship with, and the conversation started, and they pretty much seem to be turning the blind eye to it. So, and I get it, but I wanted to clarify it with you.
There's a lot of blind eyes when it comes to things in real estate. I mean, more of a conservative person, and I color with inside the lines for the most part. I mean, might go out a little bit in the gray, but not for the most part. So yeah, go ahead, Lynette, you had something.
That conversation came up, and so she was saying, yeah, like if you were with a different agency, it would immediately be revoked in order to sign with like Stonegate, or vice versa. Get revoked from Stonegate if it went somewhere else. So I don't know who controls that. I don't know who's the one who ultimately says.
I know when I moved from Ohio Real Title to Stonegate, I had to include on my email to Ohio Real Title Stonegate so that they were aware that I gave notice to the other company and severed that relationship. Now, I don't know if I was a special case or if they do that to everybody, but it's probably not a bad idea if you are the title company that's offering shares to somebody that or have confirmation from the other company that you're out of, I would say. All right, we got a couple things in the chat here. So, all right, so Linda. All right, so Michael's asking, if a client agrees to reimburse a buyer for a fee they incurred after a deal fell through, does it have to be disperse through title, or can clients do a cashier's check or Zelle to pay them? So I'm assuming you're saying, so if a client agrees to reimburse a buyer, so if a seller agrees to reimburse a buyer for a fee they incurred after a deal fell through, I suppose they could pay through Zelle, they could write a check, they could do a cashier's check, they could do a MoneyGram or a wire transfer. It doesn't have anything to do with the real estate part of it. You want to make sure they get their money, of course. So I would say a cashier's check is probably best before I sign the document or when I sign the document. But I guess, Michael, if you want to unmute, maybe give a better example of what you're asking. Specifics,
So this
maybe.
is the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is talking about with you the other day. We got them to agree to a mutual release, as long as the seller paid back for the appraisal, and they just to know, does it have, do we send the money to Stonegate and then they disperse it? But the other agent said they're open to receiving a cashier's check, Zelle. But after they sign that, do we just stay out of it, or do we have to?
Yeah, so let me give, I'll give some perspective, and I'm sure this has happened to all of us at one point. If it hasn't, it probably will. So it sounds like you had a buyer and seller who had decided that for whatever reason they weren't going to go through with it. The seller decided not to sell and wanted the buyer to sign a mutual release. And the buyer said, I'm not signing a mutual release because I have an appraisal or home inspection out money, and you don't have a valid reason to really cancel the sale. Right? I didn't ask you to cancel the sale. You're just not wanting to sell your house anymore. You got cold feet. So I want to be made whole. So I want my inspection money or I want my appraisal money back. So in that case, I mean, I would say that if it were me as the agent, I mean, I would say to the client, hey, go ahead and get a cashier's check made out to these folks. But if I were on the buyer's side, if I was the buyer's agent, I would say, don't sign anything until you actually have the check in your hand. Like it's a mutual, let's meet at the office. I sign, you give me the check type situation. I don't know that I would give Zelle up front. You could do Zelle right at that moment. And yet the other thing is too, is you could do an addendum that just says that, as part of the mutual release, the seller has agreed to pay X to the buyer. So then they at least have a document if they don't receive the check or they don't get the Zelle, that they have something to take to court or give their attorney to go after the seller, I would say. But in those situations, there's nothing that says you have to hold the money as the agent or the title company has to hold the money. It's not within the real estate transaction. They're really just paying somebody to sign a mutual release, which is in their benefit as opposed to being sued. So hopefully that answers that.
Thank you.
Okay, yep. Anybody else on Zoom have questions? It's funny, I have the Killy team on here, but I have Mrs. Killy right here. Sophia. That's all right. Come on, guys. You came in for this hour. Let's get some questions. There's got to be something going on in this world. I mean, not that I'm all knowing, but I certainly don't think that we're all knowing. It's got to be situations. One of the things I will say, as you think of questions or whatever, I recently, and I was really surprised, we had an agent within our brokerage that decided to give only one home inspector's name via text, and it became a problem after the fact. It cost that agent the commission because there was a problem with the home, and in order to settle it, we had to say the buyer was very generous, in my opinion, to come to us and say, there's a problem. I've learned that I should have been given a list of at least 3 home inspectors or none. And so from the brokerage perspective, I call the agent and I'm like, yeah, you know that, right? Like I've said it a million times and I realize that. Okay, but you didn't do it. So unfortunately, in order to hold off a division complaint, which could have opened up a bag of worms, because if you were found by the division that in fact you only gave one name for this transaction, I can guarantee you they are going to look at your other transactions and they're going to find out if you have a practice of only giving one name as opposed to three names or whatever. So we ended up, the agent paid the commission that the gross commission that they collected on this transaction as a settlement, and we had the client sign a settlement agreement. But unfortunately, that one mistake cost the entire commission for this agent to help to put in a new furnace. And, you know, I didn't want to see the agent have to pay it. And I'm always going to support our agents. Even if you're wrong, I'm going to do what I can for the most part. But I'm always going to be honest and advise you guys that you don't want a lawsuit, and you certainly don't want to be named in a complaint at the division unless you can absolutely not help it. So I would just say to you as a reminder, it is three names or zero, three or more or zero. And there is a form in Dotloop that I highly encourage you to put your recommended inspectors on. Don't put a star next to one. Don't put them in order of 1 through 5 of how you like them. And when somebody asks you the question, well, which one would you use? Your answer can't be, well, this is the one I like. It has to be, there are 5 on there. You're welcome to use any of them, and you're also welcome to use none of them. You can call whoever you want. That's the truthful answer. And, you know, if you're going to slip up and say something like, well, these are my favorites, you shouldn't, but don't put that in writing because you're just asking for trouble. And unfortunately, this particular agent had text when the client said, okay, what's the next step? I need a home inspector, right? Yes, here's the person I recommend. That's who called. That's who did the inspection. And when there was a problem, guess who they're pointing at? Us and the home inspector. So the home inspector, in my opinion, in this particular case, did not necessarily make a huge or even a large enough mistake. Our agent made the mistake by not providing the 3. And that's who would have gotten in trouble, is the agent. The home inspector probably had them sign a document that said, you can only sue me up to the cost of the inspection or whatever. And also that inspector was giving their professional opinion. They didn't break any laws. So our agent was, unfortunately, would have been found guilty. So.
You don't have to do that for some other areas like lenders or.
Yeah, we don't have to do that for lenders. I'm surprised. I agree with you. One of the things that I think that you're going to hear, and I think that you know, we have 2 great partners here. We have Cross Country and we have Keller Home Loans. And I will say, I believe somehow, and I don't understand this, I would have never approved it as a person, but somehow I believe that it came out that now real estate agents are able to get their lender's license or their mortgage license and can now get paid a referral fee for referring clients from like, let's say, for example, I refer somebody to Keller Home Loans or Cross Country and I have my mortgage license, they can then pay me a referral using my mortgage license. I think that's a huge conflict of interest personally. I don't know why the laws would be passed to approve that, but I've heard that, and I believe you're going to start hearing things about that coming out. You might even find agents that have their mortgage license and might start getting paid referrals on that. I think that's just a recipe for disaster, but it is. All right, so Megan says, on the house sale contingency in this document, does the house need to be under contract the amount of days in this document or needs to be sold? Well, the house would need to be under contract in that amount of time, not necessarily sold. So if you did a contingency or a concurrency or whatever, and you put 30 days in there, that gives you 30 days to get the property under contract, not necessarily sold. So, you know, if you put 45, 30 days, whatever it would be, hopefully that answers. You know what? Actually, I'm going to call out Kayla because she just joined, and I'm going to ask. I think her audio is connecting, so I don't know if she can hear me. Kayla, I'm going to call you out for a second because you actually just joined, and I was just bringing up something that I've heard, and I don't know if you've heard it as a mortgage loan officer. Is it true that you've heard that real estate agents can get their mortgage license and get paid referral fees for referring transactions to a mortgage company?
Yes, that is true.
It's true. So
Mhm.
I was just sharing, I think that's a conflict of interest. I would have never, if I were a lawmaker, I would have never said that was okay. And perhaps that's why I'm not. But nonetheless, so Kayla, are you, because I thought I heard you guys might be saying something about that or kind of getting that noise out there. Is that something you're going to start talking about or?
Yes, so we on a very low key scale, this has been in the works for months now. And like to your point, it's very sensitive. We need to make sure that all the T's are crossed, I's are dotted legally. It is somewhat of a loophole, and we're going to try to, I guess, use it to the agent's advantage, um, to create and way a passive income. But yes, uh, we're actually a pilot team for it. So the Northeast Ohio Sheffy Keller Home Loans team is going to be piloted. So it's not even rolled out to the entire country yet. We're going to try it on a smaller scale with a few teams. So we will be announcing like who's going to be eligible to do this training. It is going to be a full loan officer's licensing. So it is a bit of a commitment. But if you can get, typically that cap is what, like a $25 like thank you gift, whatever. This is going to be a generous percentage as a referral fee versus a quote unquote kickback.
Right, because it's not going to be considered a thank you for referring this to me. It's just like a real estate agent referring, if I refer to an agent in California and I get paid 25%, it's the same thing, only from one mortgage officer to another, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. So, question with that, and you may not know the answer to that, but let's just say that we have a spouse that we'd rather get licensed as a mortgage loan officer because we don't want the conflict of interest as a realtor. Do you think that would still apply?
Oh yeah. Yeah, as long as they're licensed, it doesn't like if they're sending the referral, they would get that referral fee. Um, and that might be something as we're piloting this that we want to make sure that we address up front, because I could see that happening, across a lot of couples.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would work the exact same way as long as you're licensed. And I think the only thing that like throws people off here, like you said, is the conflict of interest. But I actually have a family member that has a mortgage license and a realtor license.
Mhm.
And so like if you run into a deal where you have the buyer yourself, obviously you can't write their mortgage. That would be those instances where you would refer it out and get the referral fee anyways. We're just opening it up to be more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think the conflict of interest part for me is really just when I think, okay, I'm gonna get let's say for example, I go down the street and let's just say Wells Fargo for lack of a better example. But anyway, the Wells Fargo loan officer says, well, I'm not paying you referral off this loan. Like I don't pay referrals to another loan officer. If you can't do the loan, then I'm not going to pay you the referral. And then, but I can go to Kayla and Kayla's like, well, yeah, I'll pay you the referral. So to me, that's where I think the conflict of interest is. Like the consumer is, I'm going to be as the real estate agent referring more business to the person that's going to pay me back in the referral fee section of it. That's why I say it's a conflict of interest. I understand legally, obviously they've passed it. It's not going to be a conflict of interest because you can't be the loan officer and the realtor. But I can definitely see there are plenty of honest people in this business, and yet there are some that are not. And I can just see this being taken advantage of. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and to the same effect, if you have like a preferred partner with another lender and there's a lead spin, there's also a motive to get them to that lender, regardless of fees and rates and things. So there are other conflicts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, that's how I would compare it. But I came to Keller Home Loans because I knew that I could provide a better service product and competitive rates and fees. So I could definitely see other lenders rolling this out and then people
Yeah,
kind of being stuck and pigeonholed into paying higher rates and fees, and but like to your point, you're always going to have that in the industry.
you are. Yeah. Well, thank you for being put on the spot and being able to answer that so quickly. Appreciate it. We
I'm
we
glad
just happen to
I
be
finally
talking
found
about
the
it.
link.
Yeah.
Hey, Rich, can I jump in
Yes.
again?
Yeah.
Hi, Kayla, I love you, but let me play a little devil's advocate, I guess. Because
Please.
I'm
Linda.
kind of thinking along the line way Rich is, conflict of interest. So my husband's a home inspector. I never send, well, except for my daughter, I don't send any of my buyers to my husband for fear of the perception of lack of interest or conflict of interest. And I also never want to lose my bargaining power for my buyers. So I don't know, it just doesn't seem quite right that now I'm going to, if I was a lender, I can get a referral fee. Like,
And I think Linda too,
are you working in the best, am I now working in the best interest of my buyers?
right? And you really should be asking that question on all fronts, whether it's home inspections, home warranties, lenders,
Right.
and
Oh,
as a
yeah.
way to curb that, and for me, a checks and balance would be, let's offer 3 lenders. Let's make Keller Home Loans one of them. Let's make Huntington one of them. Let's make a credit union one of them. And so that you don't feel like you're steering them one particular direction. There's, as long as you have done your due diligence and you believe in that partner, I feel like on an individual level, this is the way to balance out that conflict of interest, to say, I'm giving everybody the same fair shot that I always have been. I'm still recommended 2 to 3 vendors.
You're kind of making my point exactly. Like I would always do that. I do
Yeah.
that. I never say, here's the lender to go to.
Yeah, I
Here's
think
the
everybody should do
to
that.
go to. Here's the title company to go to even. I mean, I always give, although maybe not in writing, and maybe I will start doing that. Because we have to do that with our home inspectors, but perhaps it's not a bad idea if we do it with, I mean, it's more paperwork, of course, but
Yeah.
maybe it's not a bad idea. I just wanted to throw that in there, Rich.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad idea to give more than one lender. I mean, to give a list of 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. Um, that's the thing with the legislation that allowed this to take place. I'm sure that with another correction later down the road, somebody's going to prove that there was collusion between a lender and a realtor and whatever. Not, and to Kayla's point, they could do that now because we have teams have MSA agreements, realtors have MSA agreements, brokerages have MSA agreements. So, I mean, I'm sure it can be proven too. So this is just another added level. And to be fair, this is not something that Keller Home Loan said, hey, we're going to go out and change legislation. The legislation was changed. They're just saying, hey, let's get more revenue in the realtor's pocket. It's taking money out of their pocket, quite frankly, to put money in a realtor's pocket or the spouse or whatever. So it really is coming from a best idea of more revenue stream for the realtor. They didn't think of this. It's a law that was passed anyway, but they might be one of the first ones to pilot it in the area, and we might see this catch on like we did title company MSA agreements. I don't know, or ABA agreements.
I'm going to reach out to a home inspector I know, and I think he just walked in the door, and start requesting referral fees.
Well, I mean, yeah, because
with them.
yeah, because that's the thing, Linda, is I mean, with Barry being a home inspector, I could see where you could give a list of 3 home inspectors or more, and 1 or 3 of those home inspectors are like, hey, I know you can't refer to your husband, so if I'm on your list, I'll pay your husband a referral fee. I mean, I could definitely see that happening because that's a stream of revenue for Barry, but also for you, and the other inspectors wouldn't have that business if it weren't for you. So, I mean, I can definitely see that happening, and yet do we all think that that's the way things should happen? But doesn't it anyway?
Right.
So,
I'm all for making money. I mean, I wasn't
yeah, of
trying to
course.
bash anybody
Yeah.
or anybody. So thanks.
All right, Stacy's got a question. Do we need to give 3 or more subcontractor names if the home inspection shows items that need looked into further? Or is this just the home inspectors? It is just home inspectors. That's the license law. The only thing I would say to you is, it goes back to just what happened with the agent that we had that only gave 1 home inspector. I have seen cases where agents have given a contractor's name. The contractor messes things up and the agent is blamed for it because it was their recommendation. So I would just say to you, put yourself on the other side of the situation always and say, how would I feel if this was done to me? And if you're okay with how you would do that because it's okay how you would feel, then I guess your conscience is going to tell you that's fine. But I think it's interesting. I even had an agent call me recently and say, is it okay if I sell my own property and the buyer doesn't have representation? Legally, yeah, you could do that. I mean, you can put that the buyer has no representation, but I think you're also cutting yourself short because you are a real estate agent for a living. So by not recommending to that buyer that they have representation, aren't you kind of saying that what you do doesn't matter, or that you're not worth the additional money, or they're not worth the additional money? Because you don't want to pay the additional money. You don't want to recommend that a buyer be represented on your own home because you don't want to pay that commission. But we're going out and asking other people to pay that commission, and we're trying to justify that. So I just think it's interesting, some of the questions that we get. And I would say to you, ask yourself that question: how would I feel if this? And Stacy, in your question, if you had a contractor, I mean, we did have a situation where there was a spouse of a contractor that I had to get involved because she was the agent involved. She recommended her spouse. It turned into an absolute disaster, and the police were called. I mean, it was bad. It was a bad situation. And we were brought into it as the brokerage because it was one of our agents that recommended this person. And it just so happened that it was their spouse. But nonetheless, even if it wasn't their spouse, I don't have great luck with contractors. I don't know about you guys. I don't have great luck with contractors. There's a couple I can rely on. The other ones, no way. I would never refer them, and I would never just give one name. Even people I thought I could trust, contractors, and I'm not trying to generalize. I know that sounds like it, but I've not had good luck with contractors. So I would say,
Rich, I have a question.
yeah.
So keeping in line with this, do we keep in the office, because I'm redoing my lists, do we have a list in the office, an extensive list of inspectors, title, mortgage, contractors that we want to expand our list with?
We do not. There is at the back corner here where we have, outside the kitchen area, there is a spot that we have some of our preferred vendors. We have chosen as a company not to allow every home inspector, every title company, everybody to come in and give their information. And the reason for that is because we have an ABA with Stonegate and we have our MSA agreements with Cross Country and Keller Home. If you are not aware of how much money they provide this brokerage on a monthly basis, I have to tell you that we could not do what we do without those partners. Without their services and help, we could not do the awards that are coming up. We could not throw the holiday parties. Like, we could not do those things because that additional funding that comes in is the difference between, again, profit share, and mind you, that goes towards profit share. So they are investing in your profit share. We just feel it's a better value that we have our strategic partners, and that's all we let in. Now we've also have a program where it's we have our preferred vendors. I don't know if we're going to continue on with that, but we will accept other home inspectors, other insurance companies, different things like that as our preferred vendors if they want to pay to be a part of that program. But otherwise, no. So
Okay.
that's why.
I'm sorry, Rich. Can I
Thank you.
just, because you opened up the floodgates.
I did open the floodgates. I have a mute button for you. No, I'm
I
kidding.
love you.
Go
Can
ahead.
I just piggyback on that and maybe
Yep.
suggest that we look to our affiliates?
That's
because-
great. That's excellent.
Thank you. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Because they
Yeah,
pay
and for
much.
those of you that don't know, Linda, go ahead. Why don't you elaborate on the affiliates? Because
Well,
there may be people on here that don't know.
Okay, so if you go to the Stark website, you can certainly look up all of our affiliates. They pay a fee, like we pay a fee, to be part of the board. And so I always look to my affiliate list first. Because if they're vested the same way we're vested, why not?
It's an excellent point. I'm so glad that you said that because I didn't think of that. And I have to say that the affiliates, as far as the board goes, the board couldn't do anything, the things that they are able to do without the affiliate members. The affiliate members provide, once a quarter, there's the drinks at M Bar, but also the food, the sponsorship of the repository giveaway. I think we're still giving a repository giveaway. I'm not sure why. I don't know how many people use that, but nonetheless, I think it's a repository giveaway. Nonetheless, they provide excellent services. It's not just about the once a quarter or anything like that. I mean, they provide desserts at installation. They provide alcohol at different things. They provide food.
They put on our day.
They put on all of our day.
That's
yes.
one of the big things that the realtors look at. So if you've been to our day, you probably all have, at least, it's once a year. That's where you get all your pens and pencils for the year.
And look at all the other giveaways they do. I mean, there's tons. So anything that's usually given away at the board, I mean, even the flowers, it's going to be coming up in May or whatever it is. I think early May, we have breakfast in the park. The affiliates cook, they provide the sponsorship for that. That's all of the gifts that are given away there. So yeah, excellent opportunity there, Linda. And I would highly encourage you, Constance, to go to the website and look up the affiliates. And if you haven't attended any of their functions at the board, I would encourage you to, because it is so great to be able to call a lender, a title officer, a home inspector, anybody that because you've met them, you've seen their face, you've talked to them and had clear communication. It's invaluable, in my opinion, when you're in a transaction. So, Lynette, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the wholesalers. Like, I have a guy who buys houses, fixes them up, and resells them. So he's sending me properties like, can we see this one? Can we see this one? Well, I don't know, it was a month ago, somebody came across my radar, and it's like one of those reach out to the seller type thing.
Yep.
So I did, and I asked to go see it, and we had like 4 houses we were seeing, and he never responded, so we didn't go see that house. Blah, blah. He texted like a week later and said, we have a buyer, but here's another house. So my buyer looks into that one. And so just as I look, like the original house a month later is still active in the MLS. And this new one that he sent me is now removed and withdrawn. It was just, and so I realized that it's not the seller.
Right.
It's someone. And so, and I asked him questions, and he's like, well, we have the clear to close from title. We just don't have a buyer yet on the one that was removed. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, so through the course of the conversation, he's like, well, we have an assignment. We're just waiting for the right buyer. And I'm like, so I'm not buying it. So I think just yesterday I inquired about another one, and I like did the digging.
Yep.
The guy's out of Florida, and he had a title, and then he's got like a realtor in Florida.
So for those of you on Zoom, let me recap kind of what Lynette's talking about. So there's wholesaling going on. And I will tell you that there is, right now, the House and Senate are, I believe, a majority of Republicans, and they do not want to implement more legislation around businesses and things like that. They want less, which is not necessarily a good thing for a lot of reasons when it comes to like the wholesaling. So we've tried at Ohio Realtors to introduce a bill that would stop wholesaling, or something that would make them be licensed or disclose that they're wholesaling and what have you. So in Lynette's case, there were 2 properties listed in the MLS. She wanted to show both of them. It took a while. Finally, somebody got back to her, and he said, well, we actually have a clear to close. We can close anytime. And she said, well, wait a minute. If the house is under contract, why would I be showing it? And he said, well, no, we don't. We have the clear to close from the title company. We don't have a buyer yet. And then that set off an alarm in her head. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, here she was dealing with the wholesaler. She wasn't even dealing with the owner, and she wasn't dealing with the realtor. The bad part was for that one, and I did suggest that she turn it into the MLS, and hopefully they did something. I don't know yet, but as a wholesaler, they do not have the right to advertise the property or sign a listing agreement or do any of those things. As a realtor, you can work with wholesalers if you're on the right side of it. And what I mean by that is, if you represent the owner of the property and you enter into an agreement with a wholesaler to buy it, and you represent the seller, and the seller is aware that it's a wholesaler, then you're fine. You're on the right side of the law. If you are an agent that is representing a wholesaler that is going to buy a property, you can absolutely represent them. Now, The caveat to that is, are they going to close on the house? If you know they're not going to close on the house, then you are not representing the buyer correctly, and you're not representing to the seller that the buyer has no intentions of closing on the house. So if you're working with a wholesaler and they absolutely say, yes, I'm going to close on this house no matter what, not normally the case, but it can happen, and they will do that. What you cannot do, it was absolutely illegal for you as an agent to do, is be the middleman or the middle woman's realtor. That you cannot be. The wholesaler's realtor. So, excuse me, if client A over here is the real seller and client B is pretending to be the seller, and client B calls you and says, hey, I want you to list this property for sale and market it, or I just want your help even within your circle of friends, put it on your Facebook page and market this property for sale. It is 100% illegal for you to do that. You have to have the listing agent and seller's permission to do any of that, which means you have to be the listing brokerage. So you can get tied up very easily without knowing who the owner is if you don't ask questions in those situations. The other thing with a wholesaler too is what I have seen in order to get around what I just explained. I have seen where sellers are foolish enough to give power of attorney to a wholesaler over their property. What does that look like? Well, that means that me as the seller, I no longer have the control over my own house and profit. I just gave power of attorney for the wholesaler to list my home with anybody they want and to sell my home and enter into a sales agreement for whatever price they want. And I have no control over it because I just gave that away. I've seen plenty of sellers foolish enough to do that. Don't be surprised. So you always, that's why I always say you really need to know who your sellers are, and you need to make sure you're asking the question, do you own this home? Is there another person? Full of tax and legal, make sure you're talking to the right person. I've definitely seen where you go into a house and it's the kids, let's just say, that actually own the house because it was put in a trust and they're the trustees, and the parents are trying to sell the house and they can't even sell their own house because they're not on the trust. So, you really need to know who you're dealing with. But wholesaling is a problem. It is something that we're trying to work on, but again, we're having a hard time getting any traction with it. So it's something we'll have to deal with for quite a while. And you're going to see more of it. As the market begins to shift, you'll see more of it, which is just insane that anybody would be foolish enough to give that up. The value of their house, just turn it over to somebody else.
Let's say, because I'm still waiting to hear back from this guy, can we go see it today at 4? And he hasn't responded, right? So when I put his number listed as the seller, forewarned, comes up as this Michael Ilozu guy out of Miami, Florida. So when I look for him on Facebook, I find him, and he's got this title of acquisition.
Like an acquisition specialist or whatever.
It's another thing. When I
Yep.
Google stalk him, he's like got airplanes and all this stuff on like Facebook, and he's the guy who signed the RPE and listed as an agent in Florida. So, okay, so the person who I called about yesterday, this.
And that's getting very specific. I'll share with you guys in a second.
So I reported it to the MLS, right?
Yep.
And it's like the listing agent is the same one as the junky ones from 2 weeks ago, but that was a number out of Columbus. This is a seller. This is the number out of Florida. So, but it's the same Scott Taylor with Joseph Walter Realty keeps listing these. So, like, what's the MLS going to do? What am I telling the MLS when I call them?
Yeah.
Because I specifically asked this Michael yesterday. So I said, are you actually the seller and you can sell this house, or is this an assignment or a contract? And he was like, no, it's an actual house for sale.
He's not answering. So Lynette's question is drilling down to the MLS part of it. So basically, what can the MLS do, if anything, simply because there is an agent listed in the MLS that is a licensed real estate professional in the state of Ohio that just happens to say, this is a limited service agreement. Do not call me as the realtor, call the seller. And the number that the agent that has provided is actually for the wholesale, not the actual owner of the property. In my opinion, what I think that the MLS should be doing is saying, you have information on the website, the MLS, that is inaccurate. This information is not the seller of the property. You're dealing with a wholesaler. You can't say call the seller. You might be able to say, call the wholesaler. I don't know. But if the seller themselves has a limited service agreement, we can't change that. They're allowed to do that. We only provide exclusive right to sell agreements. We don't have limited listing service agreements. We don't just say, call the seller. We deal with nothing at this brokerage. That could pop up more and more in the future. I will tell you, back in, when I got licensed in 2002 to 2000, probably 8, before the crash happened, 2006, 7, 8. I mean, and Linda, you were there too. I'm sure we all remember that we're licensed then. There were fly-by-night brokerages that popped up all the time, and you had tons of phone numbers in the MLS of agents you'd never heard of. Some of them were out of Columbus, Cincinnati. You didn't know. A lot of them were limited service. We had one locally. It was like you pay $9.99, you get in the MLS, and they do nothing else. It was that's all they did. I'm sure we'll continue to see that. And that's really what the wholesalers are doing. They're finding an agent that will say, if I pay you X amount of dollars, put it in the MLS, and you have to do nothing else. Agents are foolish enough to do it. And then, like I said, the limited service agreement, the reason that I say it's such a problem, and I recommend you don't work with wholesalers personally, but if you do, make sure you ask questions, be on the right side of it, is in this particular instance where you have a listing agent, even though it's a limited service listing agreement with this seller, has this agent understood their fiduciary duty to this client to explain to them that they are working with a wholesaler and not the seller to give away whatever profits are available in this home? I don't know the answer to that. And that's why you as a listing agent can't say, oh yes, Mr. or Mrs. Wholesaler, I'll work with you and I'll represent you to go sell a house that you're never going to close on. You have a fiduciary duty to your client, and that's to the seller as well if you represent the seller. So, and you have a duty of honesty to everybody else if it's not your client.
And in the meantime, if let's say this guy gives us permission to go into this house, we go and we look at it, and our buyer wants to buy it, now what?
Well, and again, you're getting permission from the wholesaler to go in the property. You don't actually have permission from the seller, which is the owner of the property, unless perhaps this owner has given power of attorney to this individual and we're not aware of it. And that could be.
Based on the fact that it's this realtor in Florida who signed his name on the RPD, and when I search the owner's name, he's listed, like, he hasn't paid his back taxes, right? I can see in the county records that the taxes had not been paid until January of this year, all the back taxes.
So probably he paid them. But the RPD would never be able to be filled out by the wholesaler. I know they're doing it, but hear me again. If you look at an RPD and it is filled out by anybody other than the owner or a power of attorney for the owner or a trustee, or anything like that that's allowed or applicable, if the names don't match, it is not legal. It doesn't matter. So like in Lynette's case, there's 3 initials on the RPD that actually don't match the owner or the wholesaler at all. So that's in the state of Ohio. I don't know how things work in Florida, but in the state of Ohio, that's not legal. So I think, if you have questions when it comes to wholesaling, again, bring them. I'll try and answer what I can, and I'll call the Ohio Realtors Legal Hotline for things I can't get answered. But in my opinion, the MLS there's only certain things they can regulate. And putting the wrong information in there, listen, we get fined and in trouble for putting the wrong information in there or saying something about calling, we're going to use this title company. So I would certainly think that if they're allowing an agent to put in false information about a phone number of the owner of the property, that should be something that they would, I would say, Lynette, just text me or email me the addresses. I'm happy to call John Kurlich at the MLS and have that conversation with him, because it doesn't make sense to me.
And the guy that they called on the phone, his name is Michael, but the guy who signed the RPD is Benjamin Toaf, but the guy who owns the property, his last name is Haggy, Hagi.
Yep. Yeah, so it could be power of attorney. And if it was power of attorney, it should be written that way.
Well, it's Benjamin Toaf, ATF.
Yeah.
And if you search for Benjamin Toaf on Facebook and Instagram, he's got airplanes and he's like very wealthy. And
Well, it's on Facebook, so it has to be real. She said the guy has airplanes and all kinds of things. Yeah.
So we're not just realtors, we're detectives now.
Well, yeah. Well, as a realtor, you are a detective, but more importantly, you're a therapist. If you didn't realize you're a therapist, you are. Oh, that's right. Any other questions from anybody on Zoom? Okay, second part of question, Michael. Who is going to win the Super Bowl and which squares should we choose with Amanda? I can just tell you now that you evidently don't know me very well because I couldn't tell you who is going to be in the Super Bowl. I don't care anything about sports. I have no clue. And I was forced into buying two squares because all you had to do was pick the squares. So I am the wrong
And it's for
guy,
a
my
good
friend.
cause. Don't forget that.
Yes, it is for a good cause.
I think the square is red.
Yeah.
The squares are random, and that's the only reason I did it is because I said, because I thought I had to pick a team or something. I'm like, I know nothing about teams. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I know like who the teams are, and I know like the the quarterbacks that were back in the day that were, good or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. When people are like, oh, I love that team, I'm like, okay, great. That's great. I'm no fun. No fun with sports. I don't gamble either. So and not that I wouldn't, I just don't have any interest in it. So I do know history. Yeah, that's where I'm a history nerd. Yeah. So anything else, guys? Going once. Okay. Well, thanks for spending the time with me. I appreciate
Thank you
all of
so
you.
much.
Hopefully you learned something. Have a good day.
Rich, thank you very much.
Thank you.